This is the Tank Talk podcast with Belinda Glenn.
Welcome to Tank Talk. Let's chat about the Sharks. And definitely a great feeling for Sharks fans to be able to celebrate 2 weekends in a row with the team securing a fantastic 41-24 victory over Munster. Funnily enough, their first ever victory against that team. And it really sets us up well as we head into the international break. Speaking of that, I'd really like to talk about what the Sharks can take away from these opening rounds of the URC as they head into that break. But before we get to that, let's chat about the game against Munster. The Sharks got off to an absolutely phenomenal start to the game, a dream start, if you will, with Apelele Fassi scoring the first try of the match in under a minute. And that just set the scene for what was going to be an incredibly exciting game of rugby. For everyone who complained the previous week in the game against Glasgow Warriors that the Sharks appeared not to be attempting to get a bonus point try, they wrapped that up in the first half of this game as well, getting the fourth try just before the end of the first half and ending that half 31-10. So, really putting Munster to the sword in that first half. Lots of players did incredibly well in the game. I think Grant Williams deserves a mention, of course, well-deserved man of the match, and just showcasing the phenomenal talent that we have both at the Sharks and at the Springboks in terms of scrum half players. We have so many wonderful options to choose from, which is always great. And so, a really exciting game for everyone who was at the stadium as well. I think looking at the stands, it looked as if people were having a wonderful time. Hats off to the Sharks marketing team who put a lot of effort into promoting this game and launched it as the first in their series of big games, which have additional, entertainment options and real efforts to get the crowd in and to keep everyone enjoying themselves at the stadium. It was lovely to see the stands looking pretty full. As far as I know, they had just under 20,000 people at that game, which is always great to see. And really, I think an extra special mention to the Munster traveling fans. Since the beginning of the URC, since it started, we've heard so much about how difficult it is for fans to travel to away games now. I think as South African fans, we probably have like a slightly different perspective on this because we're so used to that, right? We're used to Super Rugby where very few fans from South Africa would have been traveling to New Zealand or Australia or Japan or Argentina to watch their teams play away games. Whereas the fans from the European teams in the URC are very used to being able to just do a quick and relatively cost-effective weekend away to another country or to another city or whatever the case may be to watch an away game. And so they have really bemoaned the fact that with the introduction of the South African sides, that option isn't as readily available to them. Of course, we all know South Africa is nice and cheap once you get here, given the exchange rate factor, but it isn't cheap to actually do the flight to get here, and it's obviously not a quick and easy little weekend getaway. It's a really long flight. And so the Munster fans deserve all the kudos for still showing up in numbers. They've obviously realized what a phenomenal holiday destination South Africa is, and they always seem to just be having such a great time when they're here, and Saturday was no exception despite the results. I will say their team, on the other hand, did not appear to be having as much fun. I think they've really been plagued with injury of late and have been having a tough time of it. But over and above that, it just seemed as if there was a little bit of, they just seemed a bit out of sorts, bit of niggle, and just seemed like this constant stream of chat with Holly Davidson, the ref. Just seemed like they were complaining a lot, and I think she also deserves a special mention for the way she handled not only the game, which I thought was well reffed. I don't like to get into referee performances, but she was pretty consistent and, as always, communicating really clearly. But she also handled that constant stream of chat from them pretty well, I thought, and gave them space to have their say, but also made it clear that she wasn't going to entertain a lot of it, because it was just a lot of negativity for negativity's sake, I think. And yeah, so, obviously with a 31-10 gap at half time, the Sharks were definitely looking very much in command. The game obviously ended 41-24, so once again, a slightly messier second half, mistakes creeping in, a little bit of poor discipline, and then we saw a yellow card to James Venter, which was the result of repeated infringements from the team. One thing I think we can take away from that, though, is that the team is definitely putting together an almost complete performance, and that they're looking as strong on defense as they are on attack. They didn't let any tries in during that, or concede any points at all, in fact, during that 10-minute period when James was off. However, there were some issues, and so let's talk about what the team can take away from these opening rounds of the URC as they now head into that international break. And so the biggest one for me really is that despite the 2 losses on the road, which I still largely ascribe to that post-Currie Cup fatigue, they're having a much better start to the season than they had last year. I think they just seem like a much happier, much more settled, much more cohesive team than they were in the previous season, where they suffered 5 losses in a row and really didn't improve much even beyond that, despite getting a couple of wins here and there. So much so that I'm almost disappointed. I mean, I'm very much looking forward to having the Springboks playing again, but I'm almost disappointed that we are going into the international break now, because I'd really like to see what they can do if they continue with this current form and continue to build on that. But so yeah, for me, that's the biggest takeaway, is that they are having a much better start to the season, and I'd like to see what they can do with that. Lessons from this particular game, I think we can safely say that the Siya at 8 experiment was a success. I don't think he's going to permanently switch positions or anything like that anytime soon, or even necessarily play 8 regularly. However, he certainly had the same impact, played really well on Saturday, and I think it's good to have options. And we know now that if we need him to play 8 for whatever reason, if maybe they want James Venter in the side as well with Siya, or maybe someone else is injured, or whatever the case may be, he really played well at 8th man. So I think that's a good option to have. Likewise, throughout the course of these games, we've seen Jordan Hendrickse shift from playing 15, where he was doing really well, to now playing at 10, obviously because Apelele has come back into the side and is doing exceptionally well himself at 15. So Jordan has been playing 10, and we're seeing that he can play 10 or 15 with equal comfort and confidence for the most part. I think he is also really growing in confidence with every game, and I find his approach to winding down the shot clock slightly stressful for me, but really interesting to watch and to see it's not him overthinking. It's definitely a tactic of winding down the clock, and so he has the confidence to know exactly how to time that, and that's pretty impressive for someone so young. So I think the point is that it's great to have that flexibility, to have these players that are showing us that they can play in different positions if needed while still excelling in their first choice spots. The other thing I think we can definitely take away from these opening rounds of the URC is that anyone who thinks Makazole Mapimpi should be getting ready to hang up his boots is not paying attention, because he is just exceptional at the moment. And it sounds strange to say this for someone who's definitely not a new player, but going from strength to strength and continuing to develop as a rugby player, which is so exciting and wonderful to see. You know, we obviously all know him as the speedster and someone who can regularly score tries and knows how to find his way across the line, etc., etc. We all know that about Mapimpi. But what we're seeing of late is a player who's really developing an incredibly nuanced knowledge of the laws of the game and putting those into action when he plays, and is strengthening other facets of his game plan as well. I'm really seeing him developing into a well-rounded player who's good on attack as always, but has also strengthened his defensive play as well. So that's wonderful to see. And I think also that feeds into the fact that the Sharks are starting to play, and I mean, they've always had this in them, but we're really seeing this season them starting to play this really exciting brand of rugby that they're developing in these first couple of rounds of the URC, and will certainly want to build on when they come back from the break. You know, where the contestable kicks are becoming an important facet of their game, where the aerial battle is really becoming something that they're excelling at. And then, of course, especially when the Springboks are around, the old traditional stalwarts of South African rugby, the scrum is still a key component of their game. Possibly a work on when the Springboks are not around, but really good to see this exciting brand of rugby that they're developing. And so, of course, there are work-ons and there are some takeaways from these first games of the season that they will want to work on when they get back from the break. We're still seeing some mistakes creeping in, especially at the restart. And of course, this is the second weekend in a row where they've allowed 2 quick tries to be scored in the last 10 minutes of the game. And once again, allowing a team to get a bonus point as a result. So Munster scored two quick tries in the final 10 minutes. The 4th try, very similarly to Glasgow Warriors' 4th try after the hooter, securing them the bonus points as well. It's just not something that you want. You don't want to be handing out bonus points unnecessarily like that. And so they'll definitely want to focus on that as a work on going forward. You know, what do they need to do in order to make sure that they're playing the full 80 minutes and then some. And so definitely some things to build on, some things to continue with, some things to work on and improve on as they come back from the break towards the end of November. When they come back from that break, they'll be going into a home game against the Stormers, who haven't been having the best start to their own season, but are certainly not going to be an easy opponent, even though we are playing them at home. Then it's straight into the Champions Cup with games against Exeter Chiefs and the Leicester Tigers, home and away, and then a game against the Bulls and another against the Stormers, also home and away respectively. And so the Sharks are really going to want to come back from that break firing on all cylinders. They'll want to build consistency in the URC while also having a really strong start to the Champions Cup. And so, yeah, I think they're going to have to consider the things they've learned in the first opening rounds of this URC over the course of that break and come back absolutely ready to take on the challenge. So keen to know what you think the takeaways are that they need to focus on and what they need to do to ensure that consistency and that strong start to the Champions Cup.
This is the Tank Talk podcast with Belinda Glenn.